because we all will leave this life, your spirit will leave your body, is the simple ABC view that people have. Whether it's as simplistic as all this, we won't know until it happens to us. But you think to yourself, okay, so you've got this body on earth and you are a spirit with a form of a vehicle, which is your body. And so your time comes to leave this earth, planet Earth, the earth that we live on. Well, with that, you'd have to say man has lost his sense of the cosmos, and therefore they're very earthbound these days. Though some, of course, even many, I guess, to various degrees, but some you might say to that degree, depending upon what you're comparing that with. Wow, some still think of this life and the afterlife, of course. And so you think to yourself, if you've left this life, you are now in, let's say, a spirit form. Well, let's stop right there. Anyone who's gone into the spiritual realm, or whatever they want to call it, that's just a way of looking at it, a spiritual dimension. Another measurement to things, in other words, a spiritual dimension being another measurement to things that you can't quite fathom up. They used to say yardstick, but it's now a meter stick, a yardstick to measure such. So how do you even measure as such? Well, different accounts that you read of different people that have gone into that spiritual dimension or have spoken of such, or they've called it heaven, or they've called it the afterlife, or whatever phrase they come up with. They've even called it the third heaven, as St. Paul did. Now, Paul went into the third heaven. He went into a spiritual realm. What he means by the third heaven, you have the first heaven being the skies up there. Above that, you'd have space, being the stars, etc., the cosmos. Well, anyone's probably done this, looks way up into the stars and wondered if there's life on other planets. Well, it's not quite physical in that it's other planets. So when he talked of the third heaven, he's measuring the first heaven being the atmospheric heavens, the sky up there, the air that we breathe as far as we can see into the clouds, or a clear blue sky day. Well, above that at night, clearly there's stars up there. But he's talking about a third heaven, another heaven that isn't so much a physical heaven. So I guess it's physical when you get there, but it's kind of in another dimension. Well, people, of course, Paul was trying to explain this. He couldn't quite explain how it happened. So he says either in his body or out of his body. He can't describe it. And so it's indescribable how he found himself in this third heaven. I guess it felt to him like he was in his body and yet not. So whether in the body or out of my body, I cannot say. He says, but he heard unspeakable words there that cannot be uttered on earth. I guess the words were so pure and so beyond, perhaps even beyond human comprehension, but so pure that it wouldn't be good for a human to utter those words is personally what I choose to go with, lest you tarnish those words. So messages from heaven can so easily be tarnished by the tongue of man in not speaking those same words with the same purity of spirit that they were originally spoken in. This is the problem with said prophets or messengers of God, in other words, angels, in that they can so easily tarnish the words that they were given to speak with their own carnal minds, or in that they yielded to the wrong spirit in so doing, and far from exalting the words that were first spoken, they start to exalt themselves. And this creates a barrier between the words spoken, and people end up worshipping the man rather than the messenger who gave the message to the man. So this is the danger of going into the spiritual realm in that sense. But let's imagine you've left this life. Well, a lot of people would feel they're well rid of this life. They can't wait to leave this life. Well, that could actually be a sweeping statement, because there are, of course, things here that are still good. And let's say you're now in the spiritual world, you've left this life. Now, stop right there. You think, well, what am I meant to be? On earth, I clearly had a body, which you could look at as a form of vehicle, but it's much more than this, of course. It's a form of a vehicle, and there you are. You're a spirit in this body. And you're in the driving seat, etc. You have all of these abilities, you have arms, so you have these various tools, you have legs, you have feet, you have toes, they're all your tools. You have a hand on the end of an arm, which can be likened to a crane that picks up things, or sweeps things aside, or whatever you can do with your all of your members of your body, which are on earth, which are your arms, your eyes, your ears, your nose, your mouth, your tongue. They're all members of your body that have been given you. They're all part of the vehicle, if you like, that makes up you. Well, of course, you can touch and taste, you can see. Well, let's say you've arrived in that afterlife, in that other realm. The problem with that would be, would you miss things on earth? And what would you miss on earth? Let's say, I read once, if God took that carnal mind and heart of yours into the spiritual realm, some people actually would not be happy there, believe it or not. We all read and hear of heaven as a wonderful place, a place of all of the people around you would be pure and good and loving and kind, and all the things you ever perhaps dreamed of, or should dream of even, but do we dream of? Well, let's say you were still very materialistic and very much wrapped up with things on earth, very carnal, and all of these things you just love to do on earth, and suddenly you die and you go into that spiritual realm. You go into the aspect, let's say, many dimensions. In that dimension, you hear of the dimension of heaven, you hear of the dimension of hell, or you even hear of heaven and hell, and in between, different levels of heaven and different levels of hell, even, and different levels in between. You even hear of paradise when Jesus died and spoke to that before he died, just before he died. The person on the cross next to him was saying, remember me, Jesus. Look, I know I've been a bad person, but I'm kind of, upon being here on the cross next to you, I'm looking to you for some sort of hope, Jesus. Look, I know I've done so many things wrong. And Jesus saying to him, this day you'll be with me in paradise. And so Jesus going to the underworld, in fact, when he died. So there's that dimension at the heart of the earth. There seems to be many various, just like here, I guess, there's many various countries with very many levels of peoples and societies in those various countries. And again, you've got other verses that point to the spiritual dimension. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers. Well, if there's principalities and powers out there, well, there's principalities and powers here. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, that's this world, but against principalities and powers, that's in other worlds. Well, principalities and powers, sometimes if you look at that word, principalities, the principles there, the principle of those principalities, you could look at it like this if you like. It doesn't quite say that in the dictionary, but sometimes you look at that word principalities. What are their principles in these other realms? So we wrestle not against flesh and blood, the principalities here in our flesh and blood world, and there's many principalities, a lot of troubles in your life would come from these various countries, these various principalities, and the various principles within those principalities here, the various countries here. Well, there's how many countries are there here? Well, people tend to narrow their views down when they think of the spirit